Okay, ladies, good evening and welcome to our monthly national virtual gathering. We stream live here in our private online community the first Wednesday of every month. And then this recording is posted to our YouTube channel 2 weeks later, and you can see all of our previous recordings. The YouTube channel is at nlhg.org. The National Ladies Homestead Gathering is a national nonprofit where women share and celebrate all things homesteading. So whether you're container gardening on your back patio, you have a full farm, you're knitting, or anywhere in between, there is a place for you here. We currently have 22 chapters nationwide, and our chapters are growing. And we had 2 new chapters that I introduced last month. So we just welcome everyone back, and I hope you're all doing well. My name's Nancy, and I have the pleasure of serving as the media director for NLHG. And I'm just so grateful that you're here. So the purpose of the National Ladies Homestead Gathering is to empower women through homesteading. And our mission is to share knowledge, build community, and grow friendships. Just a quick announcement, if you saw maybe on our waiting slides, but our VIP sponsor spotlight, or our partner spotlight this month, is Haas. So whether you're filling raised beds, planting a backyard garden, or trying something new each growing season, having quality seeds and supplies matters. That is why we love having Haas as an NLHG discount partner. Haas offers seeds, garden tools, growing supplies, and resources for gardeners and homesteaders looking to do more. Our VIP members get a 10% discount. All the details for the discount and more information on Haas can be found in our VIP vault under the member discount section. And speaking of our VIP membership, which is our very invested partner, if you're interested in that, you can find out more information at www.nlhg.org. It's only $35 a year. It gets you access to our discounts, our online library, and so much more. Don't forget to check out our swag shop. We have 3 new designs that are posted in there, and there is something for everyone. So before the presentation gets started, I just want to ask that you put all your questions in the chat, and then we'll pull from those questions during the Q&A at the end. So I would like to welcome our guest speaker tonight is Marrion Newsam Banks. And you know, I met Marrion about a year ago. She was at one of our local chapters, and I saw the topic was fruit tree guilds. And honestly, I was thinking it was like a club of ladies who were into fruit trees. And I was totally mistaken and I was completely blown away by her presentation. And I think you're all going to love it and learn something new tonight about what to plant around your fruit trees so you can really encourage the most growth, fruit, and health of your trees. So let me go ahead and invite Marrion here. It takes just a second for the invitation to get to her and for her to be able to log on.
Okay, let's see if everything gets set up properly. Okay.
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Can't see me either. And let's see, what do I need to do?
Hover down at the bottom. Is your video on?
Should be. Let's try that one. There I am.
There you go.
Hey.
There you go. Hi, good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, Marrion, I'm going to go ahead and just turn off my camera and let you go. If you have any questions, I'm listening. I'm right here. So just let me know and I will pop back on for you. Okay?
Great. Okay.
All right.
Well, we'll get started. Let me just say a few words about myself. I am a lifelong gardener. And I moved here to my 80-acre farm in North Idaho 35 years ago with my husband. and we raised 3 children, horses, sheep, and every form of barnyard fowl there is. I drew the line at emus, although my husband desperately wanted to try that too. And now I'm just have reduced my flock down to my 2 elderly ewes, and now I have grandchildren. So there we go. Tonight we're going to talk about fruit tree guilds, and I'm going to use PowerPoint. So let me share my screen with you, and we will get started as soon as I can find my share. There it is. So, no, that's not what I need to do. Stop. Hang on a second, kids. You'd think I'd never done this before. All right, can anyone see that?
No, I cannot see your presentation yet.
Hang on a second. Oh, I know what I need to do, I think. Hold on. So let me go here to setting. There we go, share screen. And what I want to do is, hang on. Okay, no, I'll get there. I think I'd never done this before, but let's see here. All right. To look at my options here. Select a tab to share window. There we go. Alrighty.
All
Okay,
right,
so
I can see it very well. You're good to go.
Okay, excellent. So as I said, tonight's topic is fruit tree guilds. And first of all, we should probably start with some definitions. Fruit tree guilds are part of a larger gardening / horticulture philosophy called permaculture. And permaculture is a design system that's intended to incorporate all aspects of ecological and sustainable living, which would include the plants in your garden, the animals you raise, the people you live with, your buildings, and your community at large. And so it's more of a macro view of what you're trying to accomplish. A fruit tree guild is a piece of permaculture. It's a permaculture design technique where we take a central fruit or nut tree and then we surround it by supporting plants to create a mini ecosystem. When you're thinking fruit tree guilds, try to think what it looks like when you take a walk in the woods. All right, in the woods you see large overstory trees, and then underneath those trees you see smaller trees, shrubs, and understory plants. So we're kind of trying to recreate that natural ecosystem in our gardens and our orchards. The benefits of fruit tree guilds are many. One of those, probably one of the most important ones for those of us who are trying to grow our own food, is increased productivity. By planting other plants underneath our fruit and nut trees, we're maximizing the use of space and resources and potentially leading to higher yields per square foot. Not necessarily higher yields for the fruit tree specifically, but higher yields overall within the footprint of what would normally be wasted space. Normally, under most fruit trees and most orchards, it's just grass or in my case, low-growing weeds. So plants that we want to grow underneath those fruit trees, we can actually increase the productivity of that area. We also have increased biodiversity. And of course, if we have a more varied ecosystem, then we're likely to have a more resilient ecosystem, one that is going to come back from drought, insect and disease attack. It also can result in improved soil health. Different plants contribute different nutrients and use different nutrients in the soil. So it can help us to build healthy soil structure. Reduced pest and disease pressure. Nothing attracts an insect or a disease more readily than a monoculture. That is, there's a reason why traditional agriculture expends a lot of money on pesticides. because when you have acres and acres and acres of corn, you better not be surprised when you get corn borer, because the insect is like smorgasbord time. So by creating a more varied ecosystem, we can also reduce pest and disease pressure on any one given plant or crop. And I kind of hesitate to even include this last one. Every single gardening philosophy out there guarantees that this is going to make gardening low maintenance. And I'm always a little suspicious of that claim. I think that they can be relatively low maintenance once they're established. But until they're actually established and everyone's growing happily together, I think you're going to have to count on a little work. So here I've just put together a couple of pictures of some examples of what a fruit tree guild could look like. Here you have a single fruit tree in the middle of this oval bed, and underneath it you have a number of different plants that have been planted to encourage greater health to this tree. In the case of, you've got chives, you've got, I'm not sure what that yellow blooming thing is back there. It might be yarrow. It looks close to yarrow. It looks like you have some comfrey there, acting as an accumulator plant for nutrients. And so what you've got there is an example of a pretty good example of a fruit tree guild. Here's a smaller one. Fruit tree guilds don't have to be enormous. This looks like a dwarf or a semi-dwarf tree, and underneath it they planted, again, that looks like comfrey to me, and some smaller ground covers to help with weed suppression and moisture conservation. Fruit tree guilds are created in layers like a cake. So if we start at the top layer, what we're looking at is the canopy layer. That's the large tree, whether it's a fruit or a nut tree. Then there is the sub-canopy layer. And this layer, it can be used or not used depending on the size of your canopy tree. If you planted a standard tree that is going to, when it's full grown, be somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 feet high, well, then a smaller tree underneath it is entirely possible. You could plant dwarf fruit trees, for example. But most of us, pardon me, most of us are probably not planting standard trees in our fruit tree orchards, and so you may have to skip the sub-canopy layer. But there's no reason why you can't look at shrubs beneath a fruit or nut tree. Berry bushes and other types of shrubs are entirely possible, and we'll talk a little bit more about that layer when we discuss that layer in detail. Then there's the herbaceous layer, non-woody plants like herbs, flowers, and perennials. Finally, you have a ground cover layer. That's exactly what it says, plants that are spread along the ground, suppressing weeds and conserving moisture. You also might have a root layer, an underground layer. These are plants with deep tap roots like comfrey, which help to cycle nutrients and break up compact soil. You could plant, some annual root crops like radishes or carrots, although that's probably not the best use of the fruit tree guild design. Finally, you could plant vines. Vines, I think, are typically used more in warmer climates where fruiting vines are more comfortable, let's say comfortable. That doesn't mean those of us in more northern areas can't make use of them. Just keep in mind that fruiting vines that produce food, tend to be very heavy. So you need to factor that into your design considerations. Okay, so let's talk about each layer in some detail. The canopy layer is the fruit or nut tree that will be one or more. A fruit tree guild isn't necessarily just one tree. You might have a row of fruit trees, and so therefore that row becomes a guild. So each tree is going to be part of the guild. And when we're choosing the fruit or nut tree, if we haven't already got fruit and nut trees established, you need to pay attention to the same rules that you're going to pay attention to whenever you plant a tree. Is the tree appropriate for your climate? Is it going to be hardy? Do you have enough growing season to produce that particular fruit? And when's the bloom time? When is that fruit tree going to bloom? I have both sweet cherry and pie cherry trees in my orchard, and sometimes I get a sweet cherry crop, and sometimes I don't. And the reason I sometimes don't is because sweet cherries bloom before pie cherries. So sometimes they bloom before the pollinators are awake and moving around and out there pollinating blossoms. They bloom too early. Whereas the pie cherries, the sour cherries, if you will, they bloom later on in the spring, and they're almost always more than adequately pollinated. So bloom time makes a difference. Pay attention to the available space you have. One of the reasons fruit tree guilds were developed was for people living in suburban or smaller yard situations where there wasn't, they didn't have the back 40 acres to plant an orchard and who knows what all else. They only had a smaller yard. And so smaller trees, semi-dwarf or dwarf trees, can be used to create this fruit tree guild and maximize the space and your ability to produce whatever fruit you want. And then, of course, you need to look at what you want to grow. Apples, pears, cherries, and plums tend to be very hardy across most hardiness zones. Although if you live further south, you can have problems with some apples not getting enough chill time in order to produce a good crop of apples. We won't get into all the details about fruit tree selection and production in this talk, but chill requirement is something you need to consider. Pardon me. When you're choosing a nut tree, remember that there are nut trees like walnut, which will suppress the growth of other plants underneath them. Walnuts secrete a substance called juglone, which is allelopathic. That means it suppresses other plants around it. Okay, so you might not want to choose walnut as your nut tree. Try hazelnut or another nut tree if you're going to choose a nut tree. Excuse my cough. I have been the victim of the virus that's been circulating in our area, and I'm just shrugging off the last of it. Okay, as I said before, the sub-canopy layer is made up of smaller trees that grow well under the canopy tree, semi-dwarf or dwarf trees, and they should be trees that can tolerate shade and still produce. So we're looking at trees like elderberries, figs, damson plums, hazelnuts or filberts. These are trees that that even if they're slightly in the shade will still produce. Keep in mind that fruit trees like apples, plums, and some of the others require full sun in order to be most productive. I think you may not have the space or the luxury of the sub-canopy layer, but pretty much anybody could choose to have a shrub or two underneath your fruit trees in a fruit tree guild. They will occupy the space then beneath the canopy of larger trees, and they're going to give you another crop underneath that fruit tree that will provide food. It also gives you a more it can also attract beneficial insects. It can help suppress weeds with their shade and their coverage of the soil, and it's just a great addition to your food producing program. Currants, gooseberries, gummy berries, honeyberries. There's a long list of food producing shrubs that you could incorporate into a fruit tree guild. Now, the herbaceous layer is one that I think we're all well familiar with. These are usually perennials, but sometimes you will have annuals and biennials that also can be incorporated. And these are plants that have specific functions in the guild, within the ecosystem. You'll have plants that are nitrogen fixers, like clovers, lupins, sweet peas, and vetch. You'll have dynamic accumulators, like comfrey, borage, nettles, and rhubarb. There will be pollinator attractors. Calendula, yarrow, bee balm, and asters are all plants that have blossoms that attract pollinators. And there will be plants that are beneficial insect habitat, blanket flower, showy milkweed, and dill and fennel. Though, if you're going to plant dill, don't plant fennel, and if you're going to plant fennel, don't plant dill. You don't want those two cross-pollinating. The ground cover level acts as a mulch or a weed suppression barrier, and it can protect soil from runoff and erosion and help conserve soil moisture. It can also be a food producer. Strawberries can be a ground cover, and low-growing clovers can also act as a nitrogen fixer. I put oregano on this list because a lot of Fruit Tree Guild websites will tell you you can plant oregano, but I caution you to be very careful with oregano. It has been my experience that once you have oregano, you will always have oregano. I moved my vegetable/herb garden to a completely different location about 15 years ago, and I still have a very flourishing crop of oregano in my old garden site. I've just accepted it as my fate. I mow it like grass. It comes right back. But I certainly never I never run low on oregano at my house. Now, I'm going to make a little side trip here and maybe give you something else to think about in this Fruit Tree Guild presentation. One of the ground covers you might want to consider in your Fruit Tree Guild is mushrooms. When designing your ground cover layer, and you're going to want to use mulch as part of the process. If you mulch with hardwood chips to a depth of at least 4 inches and all the way out to the edge of the guild, you can inoculate that mulch with King Stropharia mushroom spawn. And I have included a link to a source for this mushroom spawn in the handout that you will all have access to after the presentation. The address is right here on the screen, but don't break your arm trying to write it down. It'll be available to you later. Fruiting from these mushrooms from the spawn can occur in as little as 2 months or as much as a full year, depending on temperature and moisture. And it grows best in part to full sun, where they're allowed to grow under the shade cast by plants in full sun, like under a fruit tree, just saying. You can start your inoculation process as early as April or as late as September, but spring is usually the preferred time if you want mushrooms in the same season. Now, my husband and I grew King Stropharia mushrooms underneath our fruit trees and some of our garden plots for many years. Eventually, the spawn does weaken and die out, and it's just something you have to renew from time to time. Basically, you layer the spawn on top of the mulch, breaking it up into fine particles and leaving some in chunks. And then on top of that, you put about 4 inches of wood chips or straw, soak the bed with water, and they, as I say, in either 2 months to a year, you'll end up with mushrooms. And they require very little maintenance. You would water if you're watering the rest of the plants in the mushroom guild, in the fruit tree guild, you'll be also watering your mushrooms. If you add 2 to 4 inches of fresh wood chips or straw in the fall, you'll provide fresh feedstock and you'll protect the mycelium, that is the part of the mushroom that's growing underground, from frost damage. Eventually, you can pick that mycelium up, divide it into chunks, and spread it to other areas of your orchard or garden. Now, people do ask, well, all right, how do I know if the mushroom I see growing is King Stropharia and not something poisonous, not something else? Once a specific type of mushroom has colonized a bed, it will create conditions that exclude other mushrooms. And if you have a healthy bed of King Stropharia, you won't have other mushrooms. But here are the King Stropharia ID, the characteristics. Won't read them all to you. Again, this will be in the handout if you are interested in this other way of increasing your food production. King Stropharia is sometimes called the potato mushroom because it has a kind of a potatoey flavor. It's very we used to eat it sautéed in butter, and it was very tasty. You can also freeze it. It's quite easy to freeze. The only sure way to identify a mushroom is by taking a spore print. The Stropharia mushroom leaves a black-purple spore mark, and when in doubt, just don't eat one. The point is, even if you don't eat these mushrooms, they provide an enormous help to your fruit tree guild. They break down biomass like wood chips, straw, or manure, and convert it into soil. And some sources even say that the mycelium can parasitize and kill root nematodes. But probably the most important thing that they do is they establish a mycorrhizal relationship with your plants in the fruit tree guild, and therefore create this vast network of mycelium, which gathers water and nutrients from the soil and provides it to the plants in your guild. Keep in mind that mushrooms can't produce their own food. Okay, they can only live on wood chips, manure, and so on. But what they can do is they can attach themselves to the roots of other plants, and the other plants feed the mycelium with a little bit of the process, and the mycelium reciprocates by providing that plant access to its wider resources of nutrients and water. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Okay, back to the traditional fruit tree guild layers. So the other layer that you might want to consider are vines. And vines they're basically space fillers. They help maximize photosynthesis and production within the guild. And they can take up space that wouldn't be used otherwise. I think they get, again, used more often in tropical and warmer climate designs because there's a broader range of vines that produce food in those climates. But you need to be really careful about incorporating them. Couple of reasons. First of all, the food producing or fruit producing vines they're heavy. Okay, they're heavy, and they can drag down smaller plants and just flatten them on the ground. Okay, and as this picture demonstrates, they can also be kind of messy and hard to get around. And especially if you're like dealing with fruit trees that have to be regularly maintained, pruned, you have to get in there to collect the fruits, collect the fruit or nuts. Vines can be kind of in the way. But that being said, there's still some use for them, and you might want to consider incorporating them. Just be careful how you do it. Malabar spinach, it's actually a vining spinach. I guess you can eat it. I've never tried it, but what the heck? This might be this year that I do. Sweet peas and hops are all, use hops with caution. They are very vigorous and heavy, and they can really take over. But they're all things you could incorporate in your design to increase the productivity of your fruit tree guild. Okay, so here's a drawing to give you some idea. You've got a fruit tree in the middle. You have insectiary plants that looks like yarrow or a similar plant. You have pollinator plants like that looks like echinacea. You have the shrubs. You have fruit bushes and shrubs. Mulch. You have a nitrogen fixer that looks like lupin. And here we have a ground cover which looks like strawberries. And here's another simple design. You have a disease-resistant apple tree. You have wild bergamot, wild strawberries, blackcurrant, oregano. Again, be careful with oregano. Rhubarb, walking onion, and New Jersey tea. And notice that most of the plants that you see here they're all perennials, with the exception of the spring onions. These are plants that are just going to come back every year, sometimes with a little more enthusiasm than you care for, as in the case of the oregano. When we're planting a fruit tree guild, we can't forget the basics. Okay? If we are planting a new fruit tree, we have to make sure we follow the good practices that are involved in planting any fruit tree. We have to we have to pay attention to location, planting depth, pay attention to where the bud graft union is if we're planting a grafted tree, and most often we will be planting a grafted tree, and whether or not we need to stake that tree. And if we're planting a guild around an existing fruit tree, we need to remember that we have to minimize damage to existing tree roots as much as possible, and be prepared for that tree to be set back a little bit, because it's going to have to be sharing resources with other plants that it didn't used to. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, I've got this problem solved. I'm going to come along and I'm just going to drop 4 to 6 inches of compost all over my fruit tree guild area and I'll be good to go. Well, yes and no. Yes, that's probably a good idea. It's probably generally a good idea to put some compost around a fruit tree out to the drip line. In any case, in every year, probably just good practice. Suppresses weeds, provides nutrients, good deal. Okay, but remember, too much of a good thing is really too much. Tree roots need to breathe just like we do. They need access to air. And if you come along and you bury those roots in 6 to 8 inches of compost, you may in fact be smothering the tree. So I'm not saying don't put any compost around them, to enrich the soil and provide a better planting surface for the rest of the trees the rest of the plants in the guild, but be careful not to get too carried away. Okay, because that can really be detrimental to the tree that is the center of this guild. Again, every time I give a gardening talk, I feel like I'm going back to this subject. It's the soil, stupid. It always is. Soil fertility, that's what matters. The single most important factor in your success as a gardener in growing food, flowers, or whatever you're out there for is soil fertility. So if you haven't done so in the past 2 to 3 years, get a soil test. Go out there, dig around the fruit trees that you're planning to create a guild for, and get a soil test. Find out what you've got. I have an address here for a laboratory in Idaho that I strongly recommend to people. You want you want to send your soil test to a good lab that will give you not just what your numbers are, but will also give you recommendations about how much of whatever kind of fertilizer you want to add in order to bring your soil up to the peak or optimal conditions for whatever purpose you're planning. In Idaho, the Stugenholz lab provides that kind of information. You're going to use that test to add the nutrients needed to bring your soil up to maximum productivity. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but don't forget the micronutrients, because they can be just as critical to soil health and the health of your plants as the big three. And remember, a friend of mine sent me a meme just the other day, and it said, soil doesn't hold water. Soil structure holds water. Okay, and that's very true. It's the organic matter and the spaces in between soil particles where water and nutrients hide. And without good soil structure, it all just washes away. It all just drains away to somewhere else. So improved soil structure is important, and organic matter is the key to that. It allows water and nutrients to be held next to the plant's roots for better absorption, controls erosion, and the best sources of organic matter are good quality compost or well-rotted manure. Just a note, please don't depend on manure as your source for the NPK, okay? Manure is not a particularly good fertilizer, but it is an excellent soil structure amendment. So I use manure myself all the time, but I know, and I don't depend on it to provide me with, significant amounts of nitrogen, potassium, or phosphorus. Again, don't forget pH. You need to know what the relative acidity or alkalinity of your soil is. The lower your pH is, the more acid your soil is. The higher your pH, the more alkaline. Some plants require acidic soils, pH of 6 or lower. Blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, evergreens, they all want acidic soil. Other plants, fruit and nut trees, asparagus, lilacs, sweet peas, lavender, they all require neutral or alkaline soil. I bring this up specifically because if you've done any research online about fruit tree guilds, you will inevitably find at least one, if not more, sources that will tell you that one of the shrubs you should be planting under your fruit trees in your fruit tree guild are blueberries. I've just shown you that the pH of blueberries is incompatible with the pH of fruit and nut trees. Fruit and nut trees want alkaline, well, at least neutral to alkaline soil. Blueberries require an acidic soil. They don't mix. If you want to have blueberries, great. Have blueberries, but put them in a place where you can give them the acidic soil they need, and don't try to make them happy underneath fruit trees, because somebody's going to be unhappy, and it'll probably be your blueberries. It's just save yourself some frustration. Now, the goal is to have a self-sustaining plant community that doesn't require a lot of additional water. And that's a great idea, but a new guild will require additional supplemental water until it's well established. Mulch is important because it not only breaks down over time and creates better garden soil, but it also conserves moisture. It's probably better to use soaker hoses or drip irrigation because that will put water where it's needed most. But if all you have is overhead sprinklers, use them. Remember, Mother Nature does all of her watering overhead. Okay? So try not to beat yourself up about it if you don't have soaker hoses or drip irrigation handy. And of course, don't forget the last, and I think sometimes the more important layer. Let's not forget beauty for the joy of the gardener. By all means, incorporate whatever flowers. You could put bulbs in your fruit tree guild, annuals, whatever it is that brings you joy. You should have, it all should bring you joy, but beauty is also an important layer. So that concludes my formal part of the presentation, and I'm open to any questions, comments, or snarky remarks you wish to make.
So I think if you can stop sharing your screen, and then it'll bring our videos back. There you go. Awesome. Thank you. So I do have some questions and some comments. So during the month when I'm promoting the next national virtual gathering, I do some questions and polls on our Mighty Networks, and I do get a lot of feedback. So Amy had said that she's in South Central Pennsylvania, and for the last 5 to 6 years, they've been hit with really late frosts. And it basically made it impossible for any fruit to mature. And this year was particularly bad. And their English walnuts are basically dead. So is there anything to plant that would help the frost? I'm sure the frost gets on the top of the fruits or the nuts, but is there any companion plants that you recommend for that?
Boy, that is a tough one. It's interesting how has been running around with their hands in the air going, oh my God, we're all going to burn up. And all of a sudden we're seeing these unusual cold events.
Mm-hmm.
Tell her not to worry about that walnut tree. If she's got someone in the neighborhood who has a mill, it'll make excellent lumber. Okay. So, looking for a silver lining in the cloud.
Right,
But
right.
So the thing we need to remember about frost is that it's going to be worse at ground level and not as bad higher up.
Okay.
And what a lot of people like in Florida who have big orchards of oranges, if they expect a frost to be, headed their way, they actually sprinkle the orchard with water, which they know is going to freeze on the tree during the cold snap. But the ice protects the tree, and in the process of freezing, it actually don't expect me to explain thermodynamics to you because I barely understand it myself. But basically, in the process of the freeze-thaw cycle, it's actually keeping the tree warmer than you'd expect. So you might just try running a sprinkler underneath her trees on nights when she thinks that there's going to be a frost, and letting them get wet and letting some ice build up, and see if that doesn't protect the blossoms of the trees, from the damage of a late frost.
Kind of counter different than what we would normally think, but I see your point. It just makes like this little protective shell around it.
Yeah. And then the other thing she could do is just contact her local extension office and see if there are other techniques that people are using in her area to help combat this. She has my sympathies. That could be so disappointing.
Right. You spend so much time. So Denise planted a mulberry tree because they're fast growing and feeds the birds, including her chickens. And she planted comfrey, pink alyssum, pink cosmos, blue butterfly peas to climb the tree, peppers, and tomatoes. So it sounds like she has a lot going on around there.
That's great.
And then I asked him, I said, hey, if you could plant one fruit tree this year, what would it be? And Melody said, blasphemy, just one. Possibly a persimmon or a cherry. Each tree would probably need a little different, but early blooming flowers and a bachelor bee box close by.
Oh, that's neat. That's very neat.
Yeah. And then Pam talked about planting apples, first peaches, pears, cherries, and then she'd put all kinds of things under them. And then Monica's got some snakes floating around there, so that made me uncomfortable.
Now, where does Monica live?
Western North Carolina. She said peach and cherry in Western North Carolina seems to always get an early frost, so little fruit the last few years. I just need to give some attention, maybe daisies around them. Lots of snakes in that area, surrounded by a babbling brook all year long. So that sounds nice, but
unfortunately, because she's in North Carolina, she actually has poisonous snakes to deal with.
Exactly.
I grew up in rattlesnake country in South Dakota, so I am, even though in North Idaho, all we have to deal with are garter snakes and rubber boas, which are both non-poisonous. I have to admit, I still jump whenever I see a snake.
Oh, I do too. I grew up in Central California and it's rattlesnake country. So yeah. So Jen asked if asparagus would be a good one to plant.
I think so. I absolutely do. And I'm planning to incorporate asparagus into one of my fruit tree guilds. I'm in the process of consolidating my gardening closer to the house. And I want to reestablish an asparagus bed in a fruit tree guild I'm developing. And I think that's an excellent place for one. So perennials like asparagus and rhubarb and some of these others are great choices for fruit tree guilds because, they're sort of plant them and forget them kind of. So you don't have to be constantly going in there, disturbing the soil and replanting something new all the time. You've got perennials that with care will come back every year and provide you with food and Not, well, again, technically lower maintenance.
Hmm. And she says she's thinking of doing it under an apple tree. Does it matter what type of tree she's using, or
No,
would
again,
asparagus be good for any tree?
any tree. Asparagus and fruit trees have similar nutritional requirements, and they also have similar pH requirements. They're both pH neutral plants.
Okay. So for someone who only has room for 1 or 2 fruit trees, what
Mhm.
would you say are the must-have companion plants to include in a simple beginner build?
Hmm. Well, if I was going to, first of all, I'd pick the 2 fruit trees, the 2 types of fruits that my family likes the best. Okay, whether there's
Mhm.
apples or pears, and then I make sure that um, I'm choosing varieties of both of those that fit within my climate zone and then my normal growing season.
Mhm.
Um, then underneath that, I guess I would try to choose a berry, a shrub that is going to again produce a berry that my family likes to eat, and maybe just one small shrub for each fruit tree, and they could be different. Variety is the spice of life and all. Don't
Mhm.
choose anything like raspberries or blackberries, because those tend to be quite aggressive in terms of spreading. Before you know it, you're going to have a huge raspberry weed problem. Try to
Mhm.
stick to actual shrubs as opposed to those bramble berries. Okay. Now, mind you, if you like fighting with things, it's entirely up to you what you do, but why
Yeah.
borrow trouble? Then again, look at things like rhubarb, if your family likes rhubarb, comfrey, which is an excellent again, it's so comfrey, we don't eat comfrey, and nowadays I guess you're not even supposed to use it in a tea or an ointment, because it's supposed to be at least mildly carcinogenic. But what it does do is, with that deep taproot, it brings up nutrients from the lower regions of the soil, and then it accumulates them in their leaves. Then what you do is you just come and chop the leaves down and flop them on the ground, and they become part of the mulch, and they break down and they provide nutrients to the plants around them. So it's an excellent plant to keep around, simply because it can be used as sort of a natural fertilizer.
Mhm.
Um, then I would look at herbs that you like. Again, if you live in the right climate, rosemary, thyme, uh, sage, all of those are great plants to have around in a fruit tree guild. They're strongly scented, so they'll tend to deter pests. Okay, and
Mhm.
they don't, because they are plants that were developed in dry, rocky hillsides. They don't take up a lot of nutrients for themselves. They're not hungry plants, so they will provide a lot without asking a lot.
Would
So
that
they're
work also for lavender?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Again, lavender is strongly scented. You probably have fewer, not no problems, but fewer deer problems if you have some strongly scented herbs around your fruit trees.
Mhm. That's really good to know, because I know my
And
neighbor just planted about 20 fruit trees, and she doesn't have a fence yet, and I'm up here in
oh,
North Idaho with you, so we're in deer country, you know?
deer, moose, elk, they're all
Yep,
horrible. I
they're
hate
all
them all.
here. So Annie has a question. She said, I have a new small blueberry bush about 3 to 4 feet from my apple tree. How far apart should the blueberries be? Should I take it out of my fenced orchard?
Well, if that's the only fenced place she has, I would just keep adding sulfur to the area around the blueberries and hope for the
Mhm.
best. It's not the best situation, but if that's all the space she has, I'm sure she can make it work. Um, Rather than move the blueberries out of the fenced area, the other thing you can do, most blueberries are very amenable to being grown in a pot. They
Mhm.
really are. They're not terribly
Mhm.
big. In fact, some of the best blueberries grown in my neighborhood are grown by my neighbor, who built a raised bed just for blueberries. So she she carefully crafted the soil in that little raised bed for blueberries. And I mean, she gets blueberries like this big. They're huge. You might just put the blueberries in a pot where you can really give them exactly what they want, the perfect pH, and they may do much better for you than if you put them in the ground and you're constantly having to struggle against the basic pH of the soil.
Okay, that's a good tip. So I have another question. Michelle, I'm in Athol in northern Idaho, just establishing my orchard. Should I clear out the wild stuff as much as possible or leave as much as possible? A sampling of what's growing: small woody shrubs, stick geranium, fireweed, cinquefoil, I don't know what that is, lupines, trillium, clover, various grasses, yarrow, little tiny huckleberries. I know some of these are guild contenders, but are they all okay, or should I clear some out?
Well,
That's a lot.
most of the herbaceous and shrubby plants that she's listed would be fine in a fruit tree guild. It's the grasses she's going to have to be careful with.
Okay.
Because I think we probably, all of us across the country, are familiar with, we call it quackgrass in northern Idaho. Other places refer to it as couch grass. It's sometimes referred to as witchgrass, but it is all the same God's accursed plague on humanity. It is a sod-forming grass that is extremely enthusiastic in spreading. And if it gets into a garden bed, it just will take over and nothing else will grow there. So I would, if I were she, I would dig up some of the grasses and I would look to see whether or not it has rhizomes, sharp little rhizomes that are growing out from the base of the plant. If it does, then that's quackgrass. And she's really going to have to get rid of the quackgrass, because if she doesn't, all that's going to happen is if she puts mulch out and all of those things, the quackgrass is just going to think, well, gee, well, thanks. I'm going to just grow right here and I'll be happy as pig in mud.
Yeah, and I saw we posted your Facebook group link in the chat. And so because she's in the area where your garden group is, that's a great resource.
Delighted to have her. But yeah, no, I think it's a good idea to use existing native plants in your guild, providing that they are kinds that will play well in the sandbox with others. Sometimes you just have to say, well, kill them all, let God sort it out. And, you know, you can start a fruit tree guild simply by laying cardboard down on the ground around the fruit tree and, you know, over the area that you intend to be your guild. And then put on top of that 2 or 3 inches of compost and wait through the first season. And so the cardboard will suppress the plants underneath it and create barer soil. Then you can plant through that with your other trees, your other shrubs, your other plants, and create a little clearer ground for whatever you have in mind.
Yeah, because you had mentioned that, like, planting a new guild, that there's probably a little bit of a setback. Is that like the first year you can expect a setback for that period of time, or are you talking just a couple months?
Well, it just depends on when you started the guild. You may, for example, if you started it in the spring, and you just might notice that you have a smaller crop of the fruit tree, of the established fruit tree. It might lead to a little more fruit drop in the middle of the summer. Most trees will do a certain amount of self-thinning, and sometimes you'll be wandering under your apple tree in the middle of the summer and you'll see all these little green apples on the ground. Well, the tree has gone through a self-thinning process where it can't ripen all of that fruit, so it just loses some of it. Well, you might see a little bit more self-thinning that's going on because it's detecting that all of a sudden it is sharing nutrients which it didn't have to share before, and it may be deciding that it can't support all that fruit. But it will recover over time, especially since you're adding to its environment. You're adding mulch and you're adding compost, and the plants that are around it are also adding their own nutrients and their own contribution to the soil structure. So over time, it's going to be in the best interests of the fruit tree, but the first year might be a little rocky.
Okay.
Don't lose hope is what I'm saying. If things don't go perfectly, just be calm, take a breath, go sit down and have a martini. It'll all be fine.
It'll all be fine. There you go. So one last question we have time for. How long does it usually take before people start noticing improvements in their soil or the tree health or the fruit?
I think you'll probably see it within the first 6 to 8 weeks. I think you're going to see some improvement. You know, you got to be paying attention. Plants are not exactly demonstrative. You got to kind of have a look at them and check them out. But over time, certainly over the course of the first growing season, maybe you won't see a huge difference. It might not be dramatic, but I would guarantee that over the course of, you know, a year or so, you're going to see some changes for the positive. I mean, think of it this way: if you go from it was a lawn before, or grass, and I was just mowing. Okay, well, okay, fine. You know, it's grass. It's probably not hogging a lot of nutrients, but on the other hand, you're probably not doing a lot of fertilizing around it either. Now all of a sudden, it's gone from essentially being this little island in a sea of grass to being part of a community of plants that are being more carefully nurtured, more carefully watered and fertilized. I think that's going to have a positive impact on both the tree and the plants around it.
Good. Well, as always, it's such a joy to learn from you. I've been through a couple of your different talks at our local chapters, and it's just always fascinating. I think there's something like, I don't know how much I'm going to take away, but I always take away something from listening to you. So I really want to thank you for joining us tonight and sharing your knowledge.
I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd love to have you back again. So maybe next year you could come back and talk on a different topic for us.
I'm always happy to talk gardening to anybody who's foolish enough to stand still long enough to listen.
All right, Marrion. Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We will be back on July 1st with Daphne Robert Hamilton, and she is with Iron Mountain Tactical Training, and she's going to be talking about hardening your home and home security. And so think of everything from your most outer perimeter all the way in to help you protect your home. So I hope you all have a great evening, and we will be back next month.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, girls.
Bye.
Bye now.